Your ideas are sort of like your raw materials which you're turning into something. It's like taking pieces of wood and turning it into a chair, which allows your argument to take some form and resemble something which answers the question. Of course, you want your argument to directly answer the question, and that's the main thing that you're going to be focusing on. So once you've got your 2 or 3 main ideas, is probably a good guide to have, then start to structure it. Start to put it together. Think about it in such a way as, where's my essay going to start and where's my essay going to finish? It's impossible to do if you don't really plan ahead. That's when you're doing absolutely no planning whatsoever. If you're expecting to come up with it on the fly, yes, it can be done, but you'd have to be very, very lucky and you'd have to be very, very talented in order to put everything together on the day. You don't necessarily want to be taking that chance all the time. You also don't want to be stuffing it up right when it matters the most. The best thing to do is just do a very, very brief but proper plan in order to organize what it is you're going to be doing, know what it is you're going to be writing. Ultimately, what you've got is an essay that makes sense. It only takes a minute once you practice. When you do it the first couple of times, it may take you a bit longer, and it may be a pain in the backside. It really is. Once you get in the habit of doing it more and more, it's something that takes you less than a minute to do. It's something that automatically comes up in your head, and you know exactly what it is you need to do. Alright, so the first thing is you need to divide your main points off into your paragraphs, into your topic sentences and your main ideas. So you need to order which point that each of your ideas go into. So you will start with your dominant one, your main idea. Depending on the length of your essay, it may develop over a few paragraphs. If you've only got 3 ideas in a 3,000 word essay, not that you will be writing that many of them, if you do have that many, your main points will be developed over a number of paragraphs. And this also needs to be balanced as well. Now what I mean by balance is it's not necessarily creating 2 sides of an argument, but balancing it in a way that you don't spend all of your essay focusing on one point and then you just throw a couple in at the end. Or there is a greater balance for your second and third point than your first. Obviously your first point will be your main one and your most dominant one, so it may get a little bit more, but try not to make it so it is massively longer than everything else. Discussion that is too long or too short for any of those ideas is an issue. If you are overdeveloping or underdeveloping those things, what you've got there is you've got either an essay which hasn't used the relevant detail if you've underdeveloped it, or repeats itself over and over again if you've overused it. Also, you're looking at things like clarity and conciseness of information as well. So you want your information that you're writing down to be precise and concise. Something which you can read very easily and understand within a certain amount of words, rather than writing big long slabs of information which ultimately gets to the point but does it very slowly. Now let's look at also making and using proper links as well, because this is what you will need to ultimately do. You need to make some links between your discussion and your question. So once you've got your main ideas down, you need to make sure that those ideas aren't being wasted by existing on their own and having no relevance to the question whatsoever. Think about what ideas you have and make sure that when you have a look back at the question, your ideas answer it. Because there's nothing worse than having a heap of great ideas and they've got nothing to do with the question, or if you've got great ideas that do have anything to do with the question, your discussion doesn't put the two together at all. You can't just assume that because you've got great ideas that it automatically matches your question. You have to make sure your ideas are connected to the question by justifying it, by discussing it, by giving evidence why it matches the question. You still need to make these connections, even if it seems pretty obvious. For example, if I was to say, what can help people improve their fitness? Now you're thinking a number of different things, and I say weightlifting as an example. If I was to say weightlifting can help people improve their fitness, absolutely, yes it can. But how? I mean, isn't weightlifting more of a muscular exercise? Wouldn't you just run around the block first? What made me choose weightlifting? Specifically, what makes it a fitness exercise? I've got to make that link. Even if it seems obvious that weightlifting is a form of exercise and therefore is a way to help you get fit. That's not necessarily the case, and you've got to put the two together. When you put those two things together, your primary focus should be an argument. Even if it's a discussion or explanation, you're still constructing an argument, even if your argument is what you're explaining. Saying that weightlifting, in this case, you're explaining that it is one of the things that makes you fit. It is a backup, your evidence. Don't use your evidence as your first and foremost. don't focus immediately on writing a whole heap of evidence down, because again, evidence without anything to support is useless. It's like having a murder scene and having all these clues and saying, well, no one was murdered. If you're saying that, if you've got no argument, then there's no point having evidence, because the evidence will ultimately mean nothing. And so you need to not only use evidence then, but you need to make it so it is meaningful. So you've got evidence then that actually has some sort of use. We're going to say weightlifting improves cardiovascular strength, improves the heart. That's evidence to support that idea that weightlifting helps make you fit. But how? Well, it is essential for one to become fit. So to have a healthy heart means that someone is likely to be healthier. So there I am, I've made a connection now between weightlifting and fitness, which wasn't quite there before. The two ideas existed, you had an answer, but now it connects directly to the question, and it guarantees you get a better mark for doing so. And that's really what you need to be focusing on when you are making your response, is making sure that it's absolutely, positively, 100% without a shadow of doubt connected to the question that you're answering. Because the last thing you want is to have all these great ideas and then have them mean nothing. Or have a marker go, I don't understand what you're trying to say with this. I get sort of roughly where you're going, but I can't mark it based on what I think you're trying to do. I have to mark it based on what's there. And that's the thing. You can't assume anything. Cohesion is another thing that's really important when you're structuring your argument and putting everything together, which is, without it, your argument is not going to make a lot of sense. The amount of effort that you put in will be ultimately wasted. So what I mean by cohesion is everything fits together perfectly. It's like there's no loose ends, it's all very polished, very neat and tidy. Everything goes from one to the next. It doesn't jump around all over the place. It ensures that your argument also is a little bit airtight. So particularly one of the problems if you jump around a bit is that often when that happens is that students will contradict things that they say, which means that they'll say one thing and then they'll say something else a little bit later on. If you do that, one of the problems is it weakens your argument. So if you keep it cohesive, as you keep it in one idea to next to next to next, and they sort of flow together naturally, almost seamlessly, then what you have is you have something which flows a lot better, reads a lot better, but also gets you a better mark. You can write it as simply as you want. You don't have to overcomplicate it to make it cohesive. You don't have to use a great deal of expansive vocabulary or any sort of really profound ideas in order to make an essay cohesive. You just have to stick to the basics. Let's just go through the steps of basically what you need to do first. First, you need to find some common links between each of your arguments. Work out the 3 ideas you have, or 2, or however many you've got, which things sort of go together. Is there something which one will go directly to the next? Or if you make 1 point for one argument, will it go to 1 point in another argument? And can you make that the jump between the 2 of them? Put them in an order which makes the jump from one to the next appear seamless. It's something that it just moves along without jumping. So you don't suddenly go meanwhile or a completely different train of thought from what you had previously, because it makes it jars it a bit, makes it a bit disjointed, and it does ultimately have an effect on what amount of strength you have in your argument, but also it doesn't make it quite as convincing as what it would if it just appears a bit more seamless. And finally, put your strongest point first. Let your other points unravel off it. So even though you're trying to put an order which they will flow together, you still need to focus on having your best point first. Even if it imbalances the flow a little bit, at least if you've got your strongest point first, then you've got your most convincing point first. And then you can use your arguments based off that to improve it, develop it, and so on. But making sure, of course, that you're answering question. Otherwise, that's about it for really structuring an argument in your essay. I hope this really does help, because this is one of the most common questions I get asked, is how to structure an essay. And particularly, it's one of those things that takes a long time to get right. So it takes a lot of practice, and it takes a lot of thought and careful planning. The more you do it, the quicker it takes to do it. I can do it in about a minute or so. When I write an essay for something or other, whatever it is, I can do it in roughly about a minute. And that's just for practice and through knowing what to do. The more you do that, the more easier it is to have a very quick plan in your head to be able to work out what order things are going to go into and then put it all together like that. But that's it. There's nothing else to tell. I will see you next time.